Rasha is a petite 5'4". She walks with a feather step and looks at you with penetrating obsidian eyes. Her lips are often lightly glossed in pink, and her serious brown hair is commonly tied in a librarian's bun. She has an aura of modesty around her delicate frame. If she leans over to tie her shoes, she makes sure to cover herself chastely with one of her hands. She's fine-boned with porcelain features that give her what you think is Sparrow's innocence, but you'll soon realize that it's more akin to hard fragility. If you drop her, she'll break, but she'll cut you too. She's tough and tender, enraged and exhausted, withdrawn and outgoing, a pessimist brimming with humanist hope. She has also lived in the United States for more than 18 years, almost all of them in Brooklyn, and to understand her story, we need to turn back the pages of her history. Rasha was born in 1983 in Damascus, Syria. But when she was 5 years old, her family was granted a tourist visa to the United States, and they moved from the Fertile Crescent to Avenue U in Gravesend. At a time when Hafez al-Assad's Syria was anything but fertile, embroiled in violence, the nation saw Assad's iron fist battering his growing and increasingly daring opposition. Bombs against the regime were frequent, as were mass arrests and torture. It all culminated in the 1982 massacre in the city of Hama, where tens of thousands were viciously killed. Rasha's father wanted better things for his family, so as soon as they arrived to the United States, he applied for their political asylum. He also began working at a discount clothing store on 14th Street in Manhattan, eventually moving up to manager and then partner. 5-year-old Rasha assumed an American life. Some of her earliest memories involve asking her mother little girl questions about the world. One December, when she was about 10 years old, she was jealous of her friends and their gifts and sparkling Christmas trees. "This house sucks," she thought. "Why don't we get a Christmas tree? Why are we so primitive?" So she resolved to ask her mother. "Mama," she broached the question one day, "are we going to get presents this year?" Her mother sat her down and explained to her in Arabic that they were not Messihain Christians, and that's why they don't celebrate Christmas. Rasha rolled her eyes in confusion and walked away. She had confused Messihain with the word Mesrahain, stage actors, and for a long time afterward tried to figure out what exactly acting had to do with Christmas. She eventually learned the difference between religions and nations and about where she came from. The differences between religions and nations and about where she came from. Her mother was her guide, and she taught little Rasha how to be a proper Arab Muslim girl in the United States. Rasha's parents were not particularly religious, so the lessons revolved less around points of faith and theology and more around simple values of honesty, compassion, and protection of her honor. She had 3 siblings: Reem, an older sister, Munir, an older brother, and Wasim, a younger brother. None of them was much of a model for Rasha. Reem was 5 years older than Rasha, and half a decade is a long span of time at that age. The two girls fought often. The family stayed in New York until 1996, still without having adjusted their immigration status. The asylum claim had been unsuccessful, but Rasha's father had hired a lawyer and was appealing the decision and looking for other legal ways to remain in the country. Meanwhile, her mother had given birth to two more little brothers. Since they were born in Brooklyn, the two infant boys, unlike the rest of the family, citizens of the United States. But the pace of progress in the immigration proceedings was like washing your hair from a leaking faucet. Nothing was moving except for Congress, which in 1996 legislated even more draconian anti-immigration legislation in the wake of Timothy McVeigh's bombing of the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. Rasha's father gave up and moved them all back to Syria that year. By the time they returned to Syria, Rasha was in 6th grade, going on 7th, and she found her new environs hard going. She was crashing into puberty, which is hard enough without having to adapt to a brand new country. She spoke Arabic but could not read and write the language, so school was difficult. At first, her father put her in a public girls' school, and Rasha loathed it. Hitting students who acted up was formally forbidden, but still routinely practiced, and Rasha, who had a proud streak at her core, talked back to her teacher one day. The slap came, and she was stunned, silent at first, and then came home crying. Her father gang-busted his way to her school, screaming at the female teacher never to lay a finger on his daughter again, then promptly moved his daughter to a private girls' school. After a couple of months, Rasha's father received word from his American lawyer that they finally had an interview scheduled for their green card application, one of the final phases before gaining residency, but the lawyer explained it was nothing to get excited about. Since the family had already returned to Syria, the victory was abstract. If you leave the country, you give up your claim to naturalization. It was too late. Private school wasn't much easier for Rasha. The biggest difference here was that there were more Christian and Jewish students. In thinking back to that time, Rasha told me she is struck by how Jewish Syrians were not nearly as ostracized as we are led to believe, but Syria was still a stifling place for the family. For Rasha, it was airless because of her age and her school. Her family was constantly watching where she was going, and she felt suffocated. For her father, Syria was a failure due to its flailing economy and miserable political environment. No one was happy. It was time to make a change, so they applied again for a visa to visit the United States, and they were approved. It felt like a miracle. Reem, Rasha, and Munir were literally jumping for joy in their living room when they found out. They had been in Syria for only 7 months, and already they were saying their goodbyes to family. They boarded a plane and, half a day later, landed at JFK. They stayed at the Golden Gate Hotel in Sheepshead Bay for 3 days until they found an apartment. Now that they were back in Brooklyn, Rasha was again happy. This is what she knew. This was home. Once again, her father applied for adjusted status, and once again he began working, this time opening his own restaurant. Over time, Rasha started high school.